Apache woman
It's all
fell off
right.
her horse and
Just
broke
hold
her
still.
leg.
I'll take a
Only
look.
a lonely farmer helped her. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The sun was already dropping behind the low ridge when Eli Tanner noticed the stillness, the kind that made a man stop mid-step. Out here, silence wasn't unusual, but this kind wasn't the same. It pressed against him, heavy, waiting that he stood in the open field behind his cabin, one hand resting on the fence post he'd been repairing since morning. His shirt clung to his back with sweat and dust. The air smelled faintly of dry grass and horses. He raised his head, listening. The faint cry came again. It wasn't an animal. Too human, too close to pain Eli's gut tight. He grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the fence and started toward the sound, boots breaking through brittle grass. His steps were cautious, trained. You didn't last long in the New Mexico territory without learning to move like that, quiet, deliberate, aware of every sound around you. He followed the creek bed east. The land dropped away, rough with rocks and brush, until he reached the bend where the water still ran shallow from last week's rain. There, in the half-shadow near the waterline, lay a figure of a T-first. He thought she might already be dead. Her body was twisted on one side, a horse's hoof prints scattered behind her. The reins dragged in the mud where the animal had bolted. Her leg was bent wrong, and her face, sunburned and streaked with dirt, was turned away. Eli knelt down, setting the rifle aside. "Ma'am," he said quietly. No response. He touched her shoulder. Her skin was warm, too warm. Fever. She stirred slightly, her hand groping weakly at the ground for something to hold. When her eyes flicked open, they were sharp even through the pain. Amber brown, wary, afraid, she muttered something in Apache, words he didn't understand. "Easy," he said. "You're hurt bad." Her hand closed around a small stone, and she tried to lift it as if to strike. The movement was weak, trembling. Eli raised his hand, palm out. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, steady but low. He could see she didn't believe him. That didn't surprise him. A white man alone in the valley wasn't someone her people would trust, not after what this country had done to them. But he couldn't leave her here. The night was coming cold, and she wouldn't last it. He hesitated only a moment before sliding his arms under her. She made a faint sound, half protest, half pain, but he lifted her gently, mindful of her broken leg. She was light, too light. Bones under rough skin, the kind of thinness that spoke of hunger and running too long. He carried her up the slope toward his cabin. His mind ran over what he knew about the land and its dangers. The nearest town, Copper Hollow, was 20 miles east. Too far. The cavalry patrols rode the southern trail, but he hadn't seen a column in months. If anyone was looking for her, they weren't close. The woman in his arms shifted slightly, eyes fluttering open again. "What you do?" she whispered. "Taking you to my cabin," he said. "You'll freeze out here." She blinked slowly, her lips dry and cracked. "No trust, I know," he said. "You don't have to." When they reached the porch, he kicked the door open with his boot and carried her inside. The air inside smelled of wood smoke and old pine. He set her gently on his bed, then crouched to unlace her moccasins. Her ankle was swollen, her leg twisted below the knee, bone pushing under the skin in a way that made him wince. Eli had seen men break worse during the war. He learned enough then to set bones, patch wounds, stop bleeding. But that had been years ago, and his hands weren't as steady now. That he poured a little whiskey into a tin cup and held it near her mouth. "Drink," he said. She shook her head, pressing her lips tight. "It'll help with the pain." After a moment, she took a sip, eyes locked on him the whole time. "Name's Eli," he said. "Eli Tanner." She stared at him for a long time before answering. "Naya." "All right, Naya," he said. "This is going to hurt." He set the bone the best he could, working with calm precision while she bit down on a strip of cloth. Her breath came sharp, shoulders tensing, but she didn't cry out. When it was done, he splinted the leg with a smooth pine board and wrapped it tight. Then he wiped her forehead with a damp rag and tucked the blanket over her. She was trembling. Her eyes closed, then opened again, watching him from beneath heavy lashes. He could see the exhaustion pulling her under. He sat down at the edge of the bed for a moment, rubbing a hand over his face. He wasn't used to company anymore. Not since the day the fever took his wife 5 winters back. After she died, he'd stayed here alone, kept the land running, fixed what broke, spoke to no one. He wasn't a cruel man, but solitude had turned him into something close to one. Now there was this woman, half-starved, half-broken, lying in his bed. She didn't belong here, and neither did he, not really. But leaving her out, there hadn't been an option. He stirred the fire, watching the flames climb the blackened logs. The cabin looked smaller than usual. The bed, the stove, the table, all pieces of a life that once belonged to 2 people but hadn't felt alive in years. Eli stood, poured a bit of water from the jug into a cup, and placed it by her side. "You need anything, you call out," he said quietly. Naya didn't answer. She was already half asleep, breathing slow and shallow. He sat by the stove through most of the night, his rifle leaning near the door, eyes on the faint shape of her resting under his blanket. He thought about the risks. If someone came looking for her, tribe, soldiers, or worse, he'd have to explain. He wasn't sure which would be worse, but as the hours passed, he stopped trying to think it through. He listened instead to the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing, to the wind outside, to the faint creak of the rafters. It had been years since another living soul had shared the room with him. He felt the tension in his chest start to ease, just a little. He didn't know what she'd done, where she came from, or where she was running from. Maybe he didn't need to. He only knew that the valley didn't forgive weakness, and she wouldn't last long without someone watching her back. When dawn finally came, he rose quietly, fed the fire again, and stepped outside. The world smelled of cold ash and sage. The sun broke the ridge in a pale line of light that he looked back toward the cabin and thought, for the first time in years, that maybe silence wasn't the same thing as peace. The morning light came pale and cold through the cabin window, casting long lines across the floorboards. Eli Tanner sat at the table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. He'd been awake since before dawn, listening to the sounds inside his own house. The creak of the stove, the faint whistle of wind through the eaves, and the uneven rhythm of Naya's breathing from the bed behind him. He turned slightly to look at her. She hadn't moved much since the night before. Her leg was splinted and wrapped tight, one arm draped across her chest, her dark hair spread across his pillow. Her face looked calmer now, but the fever hadn't broken. A faint sheen of sweat glistened on her skin. Eli stood, filled a basin with water, and wrung out a cloth. As he pressed it gently against her forehead, her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she looked disoriented, as if unsure where she was. Then recognition returned. "You're still here," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. She watched him carefully. Her voice came dry, strained. "Where's this place?" "Edge of the valley. My land." "You live alone?" "Yeah." Her gaze drifted toward the window. The light caught the faint beads still tied into her braid. "You have no family?" Eli hesitated. "Had one. My wife. She passed." He said it flat, without emotion. It was easier that way. Naya didn't ask more. She turned her head, eyes closing again. He could tell she was fighting the fever, her breath shallow, her skin burning under his palm. He soaked the cloth again and placed it back. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and dry leaves across the yard. The sky was the color of tin, one of those days when even the air felt tired. Eli looked toward the barn. The horses needed feed, the troughs were running low, and the roof still needed patching before snow came. But he couldn't leave her long. He stepped outside, worked fast, and came back 20 minutes later with fresh water and a few strips of salted meat. When he returned, she was awake, sitting halfway up, her hand gripping the blanket tightly. "You shouldn't be moving yet," he said. "I can't stay," she murmured. "If they find me," she stopped, biting down on her lip. Eli's voice stayed calm. "Who's that?" She looked at him for a long time before answering. "Men. White men. They came to our village 2 days ago. They burned it. Took horses, food, women. I ran." He let out a slow breath, his stomach tightening. "Outlaws." She nodded weakly. "They wear blue coats sometimes. Say they're soldiers, but they steal like dogs." He pulled the chair closer to the bed, the wood scraping softly against the floor. You're not fit to ride. They won't find you here. This land's far from any trail. Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the blanket. Why help me? She asked. Eli looked down at his hands. They were rough, calloused, with old scars along the knuckles. Because you needed it, he said simply. That's all. The answer didn't seem to satisfy her, but she said nothing more. He stood, poured her some water, and handed her the cup. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and for a moment her guard slipped. He saw the exhaustion behind her eyes, fear, hunger, the kind of loss that didn't need to be spoken. Why midday, the fever began to ease. She slept deep and quiet, her breathing steadier now. Eli used the time to check the fences and feed the livestock. Every few minutes, he'd glance back toward the cabin door as if expecting trouble. When he returned inside, he noticed her eyes following him. She tried to speak but hesitated. What is it? He asked. You work all day, she said softly. You don't stop. He shrugged. Work's what keeps things standing. You don't talk much either. Not used to it. A faint smile crossed her lips, barely there but real. Maybe you forget how. He almost smiled back but didn't. Maybe. As the afternoon faded, the quiet between them began to feel different. Not empty, but watchful. He lit the stove again, heating a small pot of beans, and broke bread he'd baked days ago. When he handed her a plate, she took it with both hands. She ate slowly, every bite small and careful, as if she hadn't eaten in days. Which, he realized, might be true. When she finished, she looked toward the fire, her voice quiet. You said your wife died. He nodded. She was sick. He stared at the floor for a moment before answering. Winter fever. She didn't make it through. She was Apache? He shook his head. White. Her name was Mary. We came here for land. Didn't know how hard it'd be to keep it. Naya's eyes softened a little. You stayed anyway. I don't leave what's mine, he said. Then, after a pause, that includes guests. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she shifted under the blanket, her voice barely above a whisper. You're a good man. Eli looked away, uneasy with the words. I'm just doing what's right. Outside, the wind started again, harder this time. It rattled the shutters and carried the smell of rain. Eli stood, checked the latch on the door, and fed more wood into the stove. He moved automatically, years of routine guiding him through the small tasks that made the place feel alive. Behind him, Naya lay back down, her head resting against the pillow. He heard her murmur something in Apache, a quiet string of sounds that almost blended with the crackle of fire. What's that mean? He asked. She opened her eyes slightly. Means thank you. He nodded once. You're welcome. When night settled, he sat by the table again, carving a new handle for his old knife. Every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward her. She was sleeping again, the blanket pulled high, her breathing slow and even. The fever had broken completely. He felt a small wave of relief he couldn't explain. Maybe it was just the satisfaction of keeping someone alive. Or maybe it was something he didn't want to name. As the fire dimmed, Eli leaned back, staring into the orange glow. The cabin had been silent for years, and now there was another life inside it. The quiet didn't feel the same anymore. It felt heavier, filled with something fragile but alive. Before he turned in for the night, he looked at her one last time. Whatever had brought her here, the outlaws, the fire, the pain, wasn't finished yet. Trouble had a way of finding people who try to run from it. Eli Tanner wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't letting her die out here. Not while she was under his roof. The storm hit before dawn. Rain came down hard, slapping against the roof, wind driving it sideways across the cabin walls. Eli Tanner woke to the sound of it and sat up fast, the kind of alertness that never really leaves a man who's spent too long alone in dangerous country. The fire had gone low during the night. He pushed from his chair, fed it wood, and glanced toward the bed. Naya was awake, her dark eyes open and watching him in the dim light. Roof's holding, he said, just to fill the silence. She nodded faintly. You sleep? Enough, he said, though that wasn't true. He hadn't slept right since the night she arrived. Every time the wind changed, He half expected someone to ride out of the dark after her story about the men who'd burned her village. He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the table near her. "Drink. It'll warm you." She struggled to sit, pain flashing across her face as she shifted her leg. He helped her upright, his hand at her back for balance. For a second she froze, uncertain of the touch, but she didn't pull away. Her fingers wrapped around the cup, trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said softly. "Storm will pass by midday," he said. "Then I'll check the creek. See if it's flooding." She looked at him steadily, then asked, "You don't ask much." "Not about me. Not about what happened." Eli leaned against the table, arms folded. "You'll tell me when you're ready. If you ever are." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the space between their words. Then she said, "There were 8 men. They came for the horses first. When the men tried to fight, they shot them. Took everything. They wanted the women for trade. I ran before they could catch me. My horse spooked and fell." Eli watched her face. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. She just spoke like someone listing facts she'd already lived through once too many times. "They'll keep riding," he said quietly. "Raiders move through these valleys fast. If they were after Apache camps, they won't come back this far north." "Maybe," she said, "but they know what I look like." He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched by the stove, stirred the fire again, and listened to the crackle of wet wood. His mind was already working through what had to be done. More food, water stored, the rifle cleaned. If she was right, they couldn't take chances. Later that morning, when the rain thinned to drizzle, he took his hat and coat from the peg and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs. The land looked washed clean, puddles forming in the ruts near the barn. He checked the livestock, tightened the rope along the fence line, and scanned the horizon. No movement. When he came back, Naya was sitting up, a blanket around her shoulders. She'd found his knife on the table and was whittling a piece of wood clumsily, one-handed. "You shouldn't be up yet," he said. She looked up, a hint of defiance in her eyes. "I can't just lie here. Makes me weak." "You're healing," he said. "That ain't weakness. Where I come from, doing nothing means dying." Eli paused. "Where's that?" She hesitated, then said, "Near the Sierra foothills. My people were small, only 20 families left. We kept to ourselves. Not anymore." Her voice caught slightly at the end. Eli sat down across from her. "You still got family out there?" "My father," she said. "If he's alive." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll find out when you're strong enough." She blinked, surprised. "You would take me there?" "Seems only right," he said. She didn't answer, but something in her expression softened. The lines around her eyes eased. For the first time, she looked less like someone trapped and more like someone trying to believe in a safe place. As the day went on, Eli busied himself with work inside, fixing the latch on the back door, mending the strap on his saddle, sweeping the mud from the floor. Every so often, he glanced toward her. She watched him quietly, studying the way he moved, the way he never wasted motion or words. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving a hard stillness behind. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Eli cooked stew, beans, salt pork, and the last of the carrots he'd kept through fall. When he handed her a bowl, she looked hesitant, as though unsure she should accept. "You can eat," he said simply. "There's enough." She took it, ate slow, and said after a while, "In your town, what do they call you?" "Don't go to town much," he said. "But when I do, they just call me Eli." "Are you sheriff?" He almost laughed. "No, just a farmer. Was a soldier once before this." "War?" He nodded. "Union Army. Ended long time ago, but it sticks to a man. Easier to fight dirt than people now." She studied him for a moment. "That's why you live alone." He looked at her across the dim light. "That's part of it." Silence settled again, but it wasn't cold this time. It felt like understanding. When night came, Eli stood by the door, checking the rifle. The stars were out again, bright and sharp. Naya shifted under the blanket, her face turned toward the window. "You think they'll come?" she asked. He didn't lie. "Could be. But if they do, they'll find I'm not the kind to scare easy." She gave a small nod, eyes heavy with sleep. "Then maybe I'm safe." He watched her drift off, her breathing even and slow. For the first time since she'd arrived, he felt something lift inside him, a quiet sense that he wasn't just looking after a stranger. He was watching over someone who'd been broken the same way he had. When the wind died, the world outside went still again. Eli sat near the stove, the firelight flickering across his face, and thought about what she'd said, about the men in blue coats, about her father, about running. He didn't know if he was ready to open his life again to anyone, but he also knew he couldn't go back to how it was before. The silence he'd once depended on now felt too empty. Tomorrow, he decided he'd start building a crutch for her leg. She'd need it soon, and maybe, when she was ready, he'd ask her what her people called the word for home. The next few days passed quiet, but not without tension. The land outside had dried after the storm, the air turning cold and sharp again, and the valley carried the kind of silence that made Eli Tanner listen harder than he liked. He checked the creek each morning, watched the tree line for tracks, and came back to find Naya sitting up in bed, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, trying to hide how much the pain still held her down. She was healing, but slow. The swelling in her leg had gone down, and she could move her toes now, though every movement made her wince. Eli built her a wooden crutch using leftover fence posts, sanded smooth and fitted with a leather pad under the arm. When he brought it inside, she ran her hand along the wood, tracing the grain like it meant something more than just a tool. "You made this," she said quietly. He nodded. "You'll need it soon, once the leg's strong enough to bear weight." Her eyes met his. "You think I'll walk again?" "I know you will," he said. "You're too damn stubborn not to." That earned the faintest smile from her, small but real, the kind that felt like a crack of warmth in the long cold. Eli's life had followed the same rhythm for years: chores, repairs, silence. Now that rhythm was changing, but not in a way that unsettled him. The cabin felt different with her in it. He caught himself cooking more than he needed, cleaning the table before she woke, setting out her water before she asked. He told himself it was habit, just good manners, but deep down he knew it wasn't. She was watching him too, learning how he moved, how careful he was with everything. When he worked outside, she'd sit by the window and follow his shadow across the yard. He'd catch her sometimes and pretend not to notice, but by the end of the week, she tried standing. He helped her up, one hand steady at her waist. Her leg trembled as she put weight on it, the pain shooting through her like fire, but she didn't cry out. Her jaw clenched tight, her breath uneven. "Easy," he said. "Don't rush it." "I'm not weak," she muttered. "Never said you were." She took one careful step, then another. Her hand gripped his arm harder than she meant to, and he didn't pull away. The contact lingered longer than it should have, his skin warm against hers. After a few steps, she stopped, sweat on her forehead, and sat back down. "Hurts like fire," she said, almost laughing at herself. "That means it's healing," he said. "You're getting blood back in it." He didn't add how proud he was. That wasn't something a man like him said out loud. That evening, they ate by the stove. The wind outside carried the smell of wet soil and pine, and the light flickered across her face, softening the edges of her features. She looked stronger now, color back in her cheeks, her hair brushed and tied neatly again. "You said you fought in the war," she said. "Did you kill men?" He looked up slowly from his plate. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Too many." "You proud of that?" He shook his head. "No, I just lived through it. There's a difference." "Then why stay out here alone?" Eli set his fork down, thinking. "Because people carry noise with them. Talk too much, want too much. Out here, I can hear myself think." For a while, that felt better than being reminded of what I lost. "What did you lose?" she asked. "My wife. And the man I was before she died." She looked at him for a long time, then said softly, "I know that kind of loss." He met her gaze. "Your people." She nodded once. "All gone. The few left scattered. I used to have a sister. Younger. She was caught when the men came. I don't know if she's alive." Her voice broke just slightly at the end. Eli didn't speak. He just sat there, letting the silence settle heavy between them. Then he stood, walked to the stove, and poured her another cup of water. "You'll find her," he said simply. She looked up. "How do you know?" "Because you're still breathing," he said. "And people who keep breathing tend to find what they're meant to." The next morning, The world outside was frozen again. Thin frost coated the troughs, and the sun rose slow over the ridge. Eli took the rifle and rode out to check the northern trail. He hadn't seen a rider in weeks, but he couldn't shake the thought of the men Naya spoke of. Halfway down the ridge, he found fresh prints. 3 horses, maybe 4, headed west. Boots mixed in with the mud. He crouched down, studying the tracks. The pattern was wrong for a trade route. Too wide a spread, too careless. Raiders. When he returned, she knew something was wrong by the look on his face. "They're close?" she asked. "Maybe 2 days' ride," he said. "Could pass through, could not." "Hard to say." Her hand tightened around the edge of the table. "They'll come for me." "Not if I got anything to say about it," he replied. Her eyes met his, sharp and uncertain. "You'd fight for me? You don't even know me." He holstered the rifle, his expression unreadable. "Don't need to. You're here. That's enough." She stared at him, her jaw trembling slightly. Then she looked away, blinking hard. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Eli," she said quietly. He froze, his hand resting on the back of the chair. The words caught him off guard. Not because of what they meant, but because of how they sounded coming from her, a woman who had lost everything yet still found something worth saying. He didn't answer right away. He just nodded slowly and turned toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start boarding the windows." That night, neither of them slept much. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the cracks in the cabin walls. Eli sat by the fire, eyes fixed on the door, rifle across his knees. Behind him, Naya shifted restlessly in her sleep, that he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear now. The loneliness that had once kept him alive was gone. In its place was something he hadn't felt in years. The need to protect someone, not out of duty, but out of choice. And if the men she feared truly came, they wouldn't be facing a farmer. They'd be facing the soldier he used to be. Morning came gray and bitter cold. The valley lay silent under a layer of mist, and the sun hadn't yet broken the ridgeline. Eli Tanner stood outside his cabin with his rifle slung over his shoulder, his breath steaming in the chill. The ground still carried the marks from the horses he'd seen the day before. He followed them with his eyes toward the west, then turned back to the cabin. Inside, Naya was awake, sitting by the fire with his wool coat pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked stronger now. Her face had color again, her hair brushed neatly, the swelling in her leg nearly gone. But her eyes, those hadn't healed. They still carried the look of someone expecting the past to walk through the door at any minute. Eli stepped in, brushed the frost from his hat, and set on the table. "They're still out there," he said. "I saw smoke near the ridge. Could be travelers, could be them." Naya's hand tightened around the coat. "If they find this place, they'll burn it too." Like before, he crouched by the fire, added a log, and said calmly, "Not while I'm breathing." She looked at him for a long time, then said softly, "Why? Why risk yourself for me?" He didn't answer right away. He watched the flames rise, the light shifting across his face. "You were alone," he said finally. "I know what that feels like. Nobody deserves to die like that." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say more, but she stopped herself. Instead, she looked toward the window. "I can fight," she said after a pause. "Not well now, but when I heal, I can use a knife. My father taught me." Eli nodded. "Then we'll make sure you've got one ready." They worked through the morning, Eli reinforcing the door and windows with extra planks, Naya helping however she could from her chair. She folded blankets, tied bundles, filled jars with dried beans. It wasn't much, but it gave her something to hold onto besides fear. Midday, Eli brought in a small wooden crate from the shed. Inside lay his old Colt revolver, 2 boxes of ammunition, and a worn leather belt. He hadn't touched them since the war. Naya watched as he checked the chamber and wiped the metal clean with a rag. "You fought before," she said quietly. He gave a short nod. "Yeah, thought I'd left that part of me behind. And now?" He looked at her. "Now I don't have the luxury." Later that afternoon, while Eli checked the water troughs outside, Naya practiced standing with her crutch. She managed 3 steps before her leg gave out, but she didn't cry out. When Eli came back in, she was sitting on the floor, her jaw clenched, sweat beading on her forehead. He moved fast to help her up. You should have waited. I can't stay weak, she said through her teeth. You're not weak, he said, voice low but firm. You're hurt. That's different. She looked up at him, her eyes wet with frustration. They took everything from me, Eli. I won't let them take who I am too. He held her steady, their faces close, the firelight flickering between them. Then don't, he said quietly. But you don't have to do it alone. For a moment, neither moved. Then she exhaled and nodded. All right. By nightfall, the sky had gone dark and clear. The wind carried a faint smell of smoke, wood burning somewhere far off. Eli noticed it first. He stepped out onto the porch, scanning the horizon. A faint orange flicker pulsed on the ridge. Too steady to be lightning, too bright to be a campfire. He went back inside, his face tight. They're closer than I thought, he said, and Naya's heart began to pound. How many? Hard to say. Could be 3, could be 5. They'll likely make camp tonight and move at dawn. What will you do? He checked the rifle, loaded it, and set it by the door. Keep watch. If they pass through, good. If not, I'll deal with it. She swallowed hard. You can't fight them alone. I've done worse, he said. Besides, they don't know I'm here. But they might see the smoke from the chimney. He thought for a moment, then nodded. You're right. He crossed to the stove and began shoveling out the embers, letting the room fall darker. No fire tonight. Too risky. As the light faded, they sat near the table in the half-dark, listening to the wind whistle through the boards. Naya could feel the cold creeping in, but she didn't complain. She watched Eli instead. How calm he stayed, even when everything around him screamed of danger. You weren't always like this, she said quietly. You used to talk more, laugh, maybe. He smirked faintly. You learn to keep quiet when you got no one left to talk to. I don't believe that. You listen too much for a man who doesn't care. He met her gaze, steady. Maybe I just needed someone worth listening to again. The words hung in the air between them, unspoken meanings lingering longer than either wanted to admit. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. Eli froze, head tilted. He moved to the door, opened it a crack, and listened. Nothing but the rustle of brush and the faint creak of the barn. Still, his hand stayed on the rifle. They might be scouting, he said under his breath. If they're close, they'll come by the water first. I'll stay near the barn tonight. Naya tried to stand, her grip tightening on the crutch. Then I'll keep watch from here. You'll rest, he said firmly. If something happens, I'll handle it. I won't hide, she said, her voice rising. Not again. He turned, his expression softening. You're not hiding. You're surviving. That's different. She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased slightly. He gave her a long look, then pulled his coat on and stepped out into the dark. Naya sat by the window for a long time, her hands tight around the crutch, eyes searching the yard. Through the glass, she saw the faint silhouette of Eli moving between the barn and the fence line, his rifle low, his shape merging with the shadows. Hours passed before the first light of dawn touched the valley. Eli returned, cold and tired but unharmed. He stepped inside, stamping mud from his boots. They didn't come? She asked. Not yet, he said, closing the door behind him. But they're out there. He poured 2 cups of water, handed her one, and sat across from her. Their eyes met in the quiet morning light, something steady passing between them. For the first time, she didn't look like a stranger in his house. And for the first time in 5 years, Eli Tanner felt what it meant to protect something that mattered again. The morning passed in uneasy quiet. The sun rose pale behind a haze of thin clouds, spreading light that looked more like smoke than dawn. Eli Tanner had barely slept. He sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, the rhythmic click of metal on metal breaking the silence now and then. Every few minutes, he looked toward the window, scanning the tree line beyond the barn. Naya was sitting on the bed, her crutch propped beside her. She'd slept little too, waking at every sound. The exhaustion showed in her eyes, but her voice was steady when she asked, If they come, what will you do? Eli didn't look up from the rifle. Depends how many. They won't talk, she said quietly. They don't talk. He nodded. Then I won't either. For a long time, they said nothing else. The tension in the room had weight now, thick and solid. It wasn't just fear, It was something closer to readiness. Both of them knew what was coming, even if they didn't say it out loud. Eli finally stood, set the rifle against the wall, and poured himself a cup of water. His hand shook slightly, and he hated that. He told himself it was just the cold, but it wasn't. He'd seen violence before, men dying fast and ugly, but this time felt different. This wasn't a war, not a job, not orders from some officer. This was his land, his home, and the woman inside it depended on him that he looked over at Naya. She was watching him again, her eyes calm but sharp. "You don't have to do this for me," she said. "I already am," he replied. She hesitated, then asked something she hadn't before. "Why were you alone out here? Not just because of your wife, something else." Eli leaned against the counter, jaw tightening. "After she died, people stopped coming around. Some pitied me. Some just didn't want to remember what it's like to lose everything. I stayed because leaving meant admitting I didn't have anything left worth staying for. And now," he met her gaze, voice low, "now I do." The words hung between them like a slow breath neither could take back. Naya looked away first, her hands twisting in the blanket. She didn't answer, but her silence said enough that be why mid-morning, the sound came, a single crack of distant gunfire. Eli moved fast, grabbing his rifle, checking the chamber. "They're here," he said. Naya gripped the crutch, fear flashing in her eyes. "How many?" "Two, maybe three from that distance," he said, already pulling open the door. "Stay low. Don't stand near the window." She watched him stride out across the yard, his coat whipping in the wind, the rifle steady in his hands. He moved like a man who'd done this before, because he had. From the porch, he crouched low, scanning the ridge. Movement caught his eye, a glint of sunlight on metal, the brief outline of a rider's silhouette. Then another. They were closer than he thought, moving slow and deliberate down the slope. Eli ducked behind the fence, heart pounding hard but steady. He counted 3 riders, all armed, their horses nervous in the cold air. They were studying the land, maybe looking for signs of smoke, maybe already knowing someone was here. When the first one reached the edge of the clearing, Eli raised his rifle and fired once. The shot echoed across the valley. The man dropped from his horse. The other 2 wheeled around, shouting, one firing wildly in return. Bullets kicked up dirt near the fence, but Eli didn't move. He fired again, hitting the second horse's shoulder. The animal screamed and reared, throwing its rider. The third man turned and bolted toward the ridge. Eli let him go. He wasn't out here to kill for sport, just to warn them this land wasn't theirs. When the echo faded, he stood, breathing hard, smoke curling from the barrel of the rifle. Naya had watched from the doorway, her knuckles white around the crutch. "Are they gone?" she asked. "For now," he said, walking back toward her. "One ran. He'll tell the rest." She swallowed. "Then they'll come back." "Maybe," Eli said, "but not tonight." He went to the barn to check the horses. One had spooked and kicked through a board, but it was still there. He calmed it with a hand to its neck, whispering low until it settled. He stayed there a while, tried to steady himself. The smell of gunpowder still clung to his coat, and it made old memories stir. Fields turned to mud, men shouting orders he never wanted to hear again. When he returned to the cabin, Naya had set 2 cups on the table, her hands still shaking slightly. "You've done this before," she said softly. Eli sat down, wiping his face with a rag. "A long time ago. You don't look like the kind of man who enjoys killing." "I don't," he said, "but I'll do what I have to." Her eyes softened. "You saved me twice now." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You saved me too. You just don't know it yet." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the valley had gone still again, but not peaceful, more like it was holding its breath. Eli reloaded his rifle, checked the shutters, then sat near the stove as dusk settled. Naya moved closer, her limp lighter now, her face pale but calm. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked. "Most likely," he said. "Men like that don't take kindly to losing. But I'll be ready next time." "I can help," she said, determination cutting through her fear as he glanced at her leg. "You can barely stand. I can shoot from the window." He gave a short nod. "Then I'll teach you."
This story is produced by Wild West Love Story YouTube channel. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.
That night, under the thin light of the fire, Eli laid his revolver on the table and showed her how to load it, how to cock the hammer, how to keep her hands steady. She listened, serious and focused, repeating his movements until her fingers no longer trembled. "Good," he said. "You're a quick learner." She looked up at him, her voice almost a whisper. "I had to be." When she set the gun down, her hand brushed his. Neither pulled away. For a brief second, the tension that had filled the cabin for days broke. The world outside didn't exist, just the two of them, the faint sound of rain starting again, and the warmth between their joined hands. Eli finally stood, cleared his throat, and said quietly, "Get some rest. We'll need it." As she lay back, eyes half closed, she whispered, "Thank you, Eli." He paused by the doorway. "For what?" "For staying." He didn't answer. He just looked at her one last time before stepping out into the cold to keep watch. And though the land stretched wide and empty around him, for the first time in years, Eli Tanner didn't feel alone out there. The night passed slow and tense, the kind where even the fire seemed to breathe quieter. Eli Tanner sat outside the cabin door with his rifle across his knees, the sky above him black and heavy with stars. The cold bit through his coat, but he didn't move. His eyes never left the ridgeline. Somewhere out there, the men who had burned Naya's village were regrouping, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they tried again. Inside, Naya slept restlessly, the revolver he'd taught her to use resting on the stool beside the bed. Every creak of the boards or sigh of wind made her stir. The fear had settled deep inside her bones, but so had something else, trust. For the first time since the attack, she believed someone might actually stand between her and the world. When dawn came, the valley glowed pale blue under a frost that glittered like glass. Eli went inside, poured coffee, and sat at the table across from her. She looked tired but alert, her dark hair tied back, her crutch beside her. "They'll come today," he said. She nodded once, calm. "Then we're ready." He studied her face for a moment. There was no fear in her eyes now, just resolve. The same kind he'd seen in soldiers before a fight they knew might be their last. It made something tighten in his chest. "I want you to stay low," he said. "If they ride in, take your shots from the side window. Don't show yourself unless you have to." "I'll do what I must," she replied. "I won't run again." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You don't have to prove anything to me." "I'm not," she said. "I'm proving it to myself." He nodded, understanding that'd be why mid-morning. The sound of hooves reached them, distant but steady. Eli moved fast, checking his rifle, securing the door, and nodding once toward her position. Naya limped to the side window, using the crutch to balance as she pulled the curtain back just enough to see .3 riders appeared on the far edge of the clearing, just as before. But this time they didn't stop to scout. They came straight down the hill, guns already drawn. Eli knelt near the doorframe, the rifle steady in his hands. He waited until the first man crossed the fence line, then fired. The shot hit square. The man fell hard from his saddle, the horse bolting off into the trees. The other two broke formation, one circling toward the barn. Eli shifted position, fired again, missed by inches, then ducked as bullets slammed into the doorpost. Splinters of wood flew past his face. He reloaded, calm and quick, the motions so familiar they came without thought. From inside, Naya fired once through the window. Her shot hit the side of a horse, sending the rider tumbling. The last man cursed loud enough for both of them to hear and took cover behind the trough near the barn. The world went silent for a breath. Then Eli heard the metallic click of a revolver being reloaded. He stepped out onto the porch, low and fast, eyes sweeping the ground. The man fired first, the bullet whistling past Eli's shoulder. Eli fired back, once, twice, the second shot dropping him for good. When it was over, the air was thick with gunpowder and cold breath. The smell clung to everything, wood, dirt, skin. Eli stood there for a long moment, rifle lowered, his pulse hammering in his ears. He'd done what needed to be done, but the weight of it settled heavy on him anyway. Inside, Naya pushed herself up from the window ledge, her hands shaking slightly. "Are they gone?" she called. Eli turned toward her voice. "They won't bother us again." She came to the doorway, limping carefully, her eyes sweeping the yard. The sight of the bodies made her swallow hard, but she didn't look away. Instead, she reached out and touched his arm lightly. "You kept your word." "So did you," he said, nodding toward the revolver in her hand. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to him. "I didn't want to, but I had to." He understood that better than anyone. "That's what surviving looks like," he said. They buried the men by the edge of the field, where the ground was soft enough to dig. It was cold, slow work, and neither spoke much through it. When it was done, Eli leaned on the shovel, breathing hard, and said, "They were outlaws, sure enough. No cavalry insignia, no papers. Just thieves." Naya nodded, relief mixing with guilt in her eyes. "Then they were the ones." "You're safe now," he said quietly. "No one's coming back." The words felt heavy even as he said them, but for the first time in months, he believed them. Back at the cabin, he boiled water to wash the dirt from his hands while Naya sat by the fire. She watched him silently for a while before saying, "When I first saw you, I thought you were like the rest of them. Men who take what they want." Eli looked up, meeting her gaze. "You weren't wrong to think that. There's plenty like that out here. But not you," she said. "You gave when you didn't have to." He dried his hands, his movements slow. "Maybe because someone once gave to me when I didn't deserve it either. Your wife." He nodded. "She was the reason I came here. We built this place together. When she died, I stopped building anything. Until now." The firelight caught the lines on his face, softening them, making him look younger for a moment. "You've changed this place," he added quietly. "Feels like it's living again." Naya looked down, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. "Maybe it's not just the land that's waking." He didn't answer, but his eyes lingered on her longer than before. Outside, the sky turned gold over the valley. The wind had gone still, and the silence that settled over the land was different now. Not tense, not empty, but peaceful. For the first time since she'd fallen from her horse, Naya didn't feel like she was running anymore. That night, as they sat together near the fire, she spoke softly, almost as if afraid to break the quiet. "When my leg is strong, I'll leave," she said. "Find if my father's still alive." Eli's chest tightened at the thought, but he kept his voice even. "You should. He deserves to know you're still breathing." She studied his face, the firelight flickering in her eyes. "And you? What will you do when I go?" He looked toward the window, where the night pressed close against the glass. "Don't know yet," he said. "Guess that depends if you come back." Her lips curved slightly. "You'd want that." "Yeah," he said simply. The air between them held a quiet understanding neither tried to put into words. Before turning in, he checked the door once more, out of habit, then stopped and looked back at her. She was already lying down, her eyes half closed, her breathing calm. For the first time in years, the cabin felt like home again. And though he didn't say it out loud, Eli Tanner knew something had shifted, something deeper than survival. He hadn't just saved her. She'd saved him too, in ways neither of them yet fully understood. Winter came slow to the valley, the kind that crept in quietly, stealing warmth from the ground before anyone realized it was gone. Each morning the frost on the windows grew thicker, and the creek ran slower beneath a thin crust of ice. Eli Tanner worked harder now, chopping wood, stacking it by the wall, making sure the roof wouldn't leak once the snow came. Inside, Naya could finally move without the crutch for short distances. She still limped, but her steps were steady. The cabin that once felt like a shelter for one now moved with two sets of rhythm. His boots on the floor, her soft steps behind him. It had been a month since the men were buried, and life had started to take shape again. The fear that used to hang in the air had faded, replaced by something steadier, quieter. They spoke more now. Not much, but enough to fill the silence that used to haunt the place. She helped him grind corn and patch the roof seams. He taught her how to use the well pump and how to saddle the mare that had carried her broken body home that first day. They didn't call it love, not yet. But it was something close, something unspoken and real. That morning, she stood by the door watching him split logs. Her hair caught the sunlight, her face stronger now, no longer pale with sickness. She still wore his old shirt tied at the waist, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and the sight made him pause longer than he meant to. "You'll dull the blade if you keep staring instead of swinging," she said, her voice carrying a trace of amusement. He chuckled quietly, swung the axe, and said, "Didn't realize I had a supervisor now." "You do," she replied, stepping down from the porch with careful balance. "And you're late on your chores." It was small talk, simple and human. But for two people who had nearly forgotten how to smile, it felt like something sacred up by noon. Clouds had gathered low over the ridge. Eli looked up at them, the kind of gray that promised snow by nightfall. "Storm's coming," he said. "We'll need to bring the animals in early." "I can help," Naya offered. He started to protest, then stopped. "All right, but take it slow." Together, they worked the corral, moving the horses and hens into the barn. She limped slightly, but her hands were quick and sure. The smell of hay, leather, and cold filled the space. At one point, she stumbled over a loose board, and he caught her by the waist before she fell. The moment held longer than it should have, his hands firm against her sides, her breath quick in the still air. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on his. "You don't have to catch me every time." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I want to." Her lips parted as if to say something, but the wind outside picked up and the moment passed. They finished their work in silence. That evening, snow began to fall. The first flakes drifted past the window, slow and heavy. Eli built a fire while Naya laid out 2 bowls of stew on the table. The smell filled the room. Simple food, but it tasted like comfort. As they ate, she asked the question that had hung between them for weeks. "When spring comes, what will you do?" He set down his spoon, thinking, "Haven't thought that far. You'll plant again?" He nodded. "Yeah, maybe mend the fence near the west field." "Haven't touched it since before." He stopped himself. Since before her, Naya finished softly. He didn't deny it. "Yeah." She leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to stop living because she's gone." He looked up at her, his voice steady. "I know. Took me 5 years to figure that out." "You built this place once," she said. "You can build it again." "With you?" he asked before he could stop himself. She hesitated, eyes lowering. "If you'll have me." The fire cracked between them. The sound of wind against the cabin filled the pause. He reached across the table, his hand finding hers. It wasn't a grand gesture, just steady, certain. "You already know the answer," he said. For a long time, they sat like that, hands clasped, the storm raging outside, but the cabin warm and alive inside. Later that night, as the snow piled against the door, Naya woke to the sound of Eli moving near the stove. He was stirring the fire, his shoulders broad in the flickering light. She sat up, watching him. "You don't sleep much," she said. "Never did," he replied. "You can't when you spend years waiting for something bad to happen." "But nothing bad's happening now," she said gently. He looked over his shoulder at her, the faintest smile crossing his face. "Not anymore." She got up slowly, crossing the floor barefoot, her limp almost gone now. When she reached him, she touched his arm lightly. He turned, and for a moment they just stood there, the space between them closing. "You should rest," he said, his voice quiet but unconvincing. "So should you," she replied. He didn't move. Neither did she. The firelight flickered over her face, and he could see every small scar, every trace of what she'd survived. It made her even more real. Then, without planning it, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't pull away. Her hand came up to his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath his shirt. "Eli," she whispered. "Yeah, I'm not afraid anymore." "I know." She looked up at him then, her eyes full of something that didn't need explaining. He bent his head, and their lips met, slow, unhurried, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything, only promised that both of them had survived long enough to deserve it. When they finally pulled apart, the storm outside had softened to a hush. The cabin glowed warm, the fire burning steady. Naya leaned her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her hair. Neither spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the snow covered every scar of what had been, tracks, graves, and ashes alike. Inside, two lives once broken had begun to build something that finally felt like peace. And for the first time since the day he'd buried his wife, Eli Tanner closed his eyes and slept without fear. By the time spring returned, the valley no longer looked like the same place it had been when Naya first fell from her horse. The snow melted slow, feeding the creek until it ran full and clear again. The willows budded green, and birds nested in the rafters of the barn. Life had found its way back, quietly and without asking permission. Eli Tanner stood outside the cabin one morning, the sun warm on his face, hands resting on the fence he'd rebuilt over the past month. His hair had grown longer, streaked with gray, and the roughness in him had softened. He could hear Naya's voice behind him, low and calm as she hummed a tune while hanging linens to dry. She walked without her crutch now, though the limp still showed when she grew tired. The strength had returned to her leg, and she worked alongside him like she'd always belonged there, feeding the chickens, hauling water, sewing what little they owned back together. The scars on her leg had healed. The ones inside her still mended day by day. Eli turned as she came toward him, her dress catching in the wind, her hair loose over her shoulders. She looked different from the frightened woman he'd carried into his cabin months ago. There was light in her now, something sure and unshakable. "You're staring again," she said, smiling. "Can't help it," he said. "You look like someone who finally decided to stay." "I did," she replied. "If you'll still have me." He stepped closer, brushed his thumb along her jaw. "You already know I do." They stood quiet for a moment, the air filled with the sound of wind moving through the grass. Then she said, "I dreamed about my father last night. I saw him by the river, calling my name." Eli's expression softened. "You still want to find him?" "I thought I did," she said. "But maybe what I was looking for was here all along." He nodded, understanding what she meant without her needing to explain. "If you ever want to go, I'll ride with you," he said. "But I won't ask you to leave." She smiled faintly. "You wouldn't have to. I'm not going anywhere." They went back to work that day, side by side, fixing the fence that bordered the east field. It wasn't glamorous work, just honest labor, the kind that leaves your hands sore and your mind still. But every hammer strike, every post they set, felt like a promise that the life they were building wasn't temporary. That afternoon, a wagon approached from the North Trail, a rare sight. Eli squinted into the sunlight until the shape grew clearer. Two men rode up, one wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. He stopped at the fence, nodded politely. "Morning," he called. "You Eli Tanner?" Eli set down his hammer. "That's me. I'm Deputy Clay from Silver Crossing. Sheriff sent me out to check on a report. 3 men found buried near this property. You know anything about that?" Eli felt Naya tense beside him. He took a slow breath before answering. "They came here looking for trouble. I finished it." The deputy studied him a moment, then nodded. "Heard they were wanted men. Stage robbers, horse thieves. You did the territory a favor." He tipped his hat. "Just needed to close the case. You won't be bothered again." Eli's eyes flicked toward Naya, relief loosening his shoulders. "Appreciate it," he said. The deputy smiled faintly. "Nice to see someone still keeping the peace around here." He turned his horse, and the wagon rolled away down the trail, dust rising behind it. When they were alone again, Naya exhaled. "You didn't lie." "Didn't need to," he said. "Sometimes telling just enough truth is the same as keeping peace." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the hills. The light turned gold across the fields, the kind of light that makes even old scars look soft. Naya leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about leaving here?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore. I've done enough running in my life. I think I've earned a place to stop." She smiled. "Then we'll stop together." They stayed that way for a long time, the warmth of the day fading slow. In the distance, coyotes called, and the smell of rain carried through the wind. It reminded both of them how close they'd come to losing everything, and how easily they could have missed this life entirely. When the first drops began to fall, Eli stood and took her hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside before it turns." Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight. The shelves were lined with the small tokens of their new life. jars of preserves, tools they'd built, and a small carved figure Eli had made for her weeks ago. It sat on the mantel, a simple shape of a horse and a woman beside it. Naya ran her fingers over the carving, her voice soft. "You made this for me." "I did." "Why a horse?" "Because it brought you here," he said, "and because it didn't leave you behind." She smiled, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Neither did you." He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Guess we both learned how to stay." She kissed him then, no hesitation this time, no fear of what might come next. Just the quiet certainty that both of them had finally found where they belonged. Outside, the rain came harder, drumming against the roof, but the sound was soft, not violent. It felt like the land itself was washing away everything that had come before. The pain, the loneliness, the ghosts they both carried. When they finally lay down beside the fire, the light flickered across the walls, and Eli's arms settled around her shoulders. She closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat, steady and unhurried. For the first time since she could remember, she didn't dream of running. And when morning came again, the valley was quiet, the air clean, the sky clear. The graves behind the barn stood undisturbed, marked only by stones, while the cabin smoked gently with the start of a new day. Eli Tanner stepped out into the sunlight, felt the warmth on his skin, and turned to see Naya at the door, barefoot, smiling, her dress stirring in the wind. They didn't need to speak. Everything that had once been broken had found its place again in a land built on dust and survival. They had done the hardest thing anyone could do. They had stayed.